Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another live stream here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So today, as usual, we'll be doing a period of meditation, followed by a Dhamma talk and Q&A. So please start by getting in a meditation position. So taking a couple of minutes to carefully adjust your posture, making sure that you're sitting in a stable, upright position that's not too uncomfortable. So a little bit of discomfort is normal, it's to be expected, and to be tolerated with equanimity. But you also want to make sure that you're not sitting in a way that's going to put your legs to sleep or cause extreme pain too quickly. So you take a few minutes to make sure your legs are positioned well, that your tailbone is situated evenly on the cushion. There's no pressure on any nerves. Shoulders are back and relaxed. Spine is nice and straight. And you can close your eyes, bring a smile to your face. Take a few long, slow, deep breaths. Putting down all the worries of your day, whatever you've been thinking about, concerned about. For the next few minutes, you can put all of that aside. You'll have plenty of time to think about it later. But for now, there's nothing you need to do, nothing to think about, nothing to remember, nothing to plan. You can forget about everything. You can even forget about yourself. Forget about who you think you are. Forget about your personality. Forget about your preferences. Forget about your identities. So for the next period of time, you can just be nobody at all. You're not a human. You're not a man or a woman. You're not young or old. You're not pretty or ugly. You're not clever or stupid. You're not wise or foolish. You're not anything at all. So just let yourself disappear. Let all concept of self disappear. So bringing full attention to this moment without any concept of me or myself, without any concept of my identity, my attributes. Just completely feeling this body-mind experience with complete objectivity and detachment. So if you see yourself reacting to something with liking or disliking, you can recognize, oh, that's generating a sense of self. That's coming from a place of self-identity. And you can let it disappear. Just stop engaging in that self-activity. Let it disappear. Bringing full attention to the present moment experience as an impersonal phenomenon. It's not personal in any way. It's just the result of past causes unfolding and expressing according to natural laws. There's nothing personal about it. Whatever happens with this body, it's just impersonal causes producing an impersonal result. And whatever happens in this mind, it's just impersonal causes producing impersonal results. There's nothing happening to you because there is no you that anything could happen to. As long as we don't identify anything as me, then nothing that happens has any power or any consequence. Just watch the unfolding of causality as an impersonal process. Watch with objective interest, detached fascination. observing the events of body and mind as if it was someone else, as if you were watching someone else's body, watching someone else's mind. Like a scientist closely watching an interesting specimen, but without any emotional involvement in it. When thoughts drift through the mind, it's just a movie of someone else's thoughts. Nothing personal, nothing to be bothered by, nothing to get involved in. Just the wind blowing the trees trembling, dropping leaves, just nature going through its cycles. So we watch the motions of the mind in the same way. Like a tree swaying in the wind, a river flowing in its course. Nothing personal, just a function of nature. Feeling the blissful serenity of being nobody, of being completely unaffected by the blowing winds of thought and emotion, completely undisturbed by the rushing currents of physical sensation. When we are not anything, we cannot be touched by such things, cannot be moved or affected, because there is nothing to affect, nothing to move. So you can take a deep breath, stretch a little bit. So at this time, I'll give a short Dhamma talk and then take any questions you might have. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas. So as I recite these ancient Pali words, these words come all the way from the time of the Buddha. So as I recite these words, bring up a sense of deep respect, reverence, veneration for all the awakened beings of past, present, and future, this world and all other worlds. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Saṅgham Namasami. So today we started with a meditation practice on Anattā-saññā. So the recognition of non-self, of the impersonal nature of things. This is not a meditation technique that I commonly use or commonly teach, but it is a very important element of Buddhist practice. It's a very important element to be aware of, to have at least some familiarity with. It also is the most advanced aspect of Buddhist practice. It's the most advanced aspect of Buddhist doctrine, thought, philosophy, as well as practice. So it's very common to hear people say, I get this whole dukkha thing. I understand the whole craving is bad thing. I get the whole everything is impermanent thing. I get the whole generosity and kindness thing. I get the whole samadhi thing. But I really don't get this whole not self thing. Like, this just makes no sense. So it's very common to hear people say things like that. And it's also quite common for people to say that they just have no idea how to integrate anatta into their practice, how to use it as part of their development of mind. So it's necessary to start with some basic understanding here. The distinctive characteristic of Buddhism that sets it apart from every other religious system that I'm aware of, a distinct thing about Buddhism is the teaching of anatta, of non-self. So this is something which is, again, to the best of my knowledge, is not found in any other religion currently existing in the world, or that has existed in recorded human history. And according to Buddhist thought, it's actually something which is unique to Buddhism. It's the defining characteristic of Buddhisms. And I say Buddhisms because we're currently in one Buddhism, so a Buddhism that started 2,500 years ago. But of course, there's been many other Buddhisms before this one, and they all taught the same things. Every arising of Buddhism has the same basic teachings, the same basic principles, the same basic practices. Some variation in presentation, depending upon the particular people being spoken to, particular place and time. But the underlying principles are exactly the same in every iteration of Buddhism. So only the external circumstances change, but the underlying principles of each iteration of Buddhism is exactly the same. And the core defining, unique teaching in every iteration of Buddhism is this teaching of anatta, of not self. So other religious systems ultimately come down at some point on this idea that we do have some kind of ongoing, genuine, existing being, some essential core to who we are, some defining thing that makes us us, that makes us different from others, that makes us unique, that makes us what we are. And Buddhism completely rejects this idea. So instead, what we have in Buddhism is a being is described as a constantly unfolding causal process, which is inseparable from all the other causal processes in the entire universe. So the first question when approaching not self, anatta, the first question is to ask, well, what do I think is myself? What do I identify as me? What do I identify as mine, as my personality, my identity? That's the first step, is finding out what we think our self is. And so we start looking at it. It's like, well, we might think, oh, this body is myself, or it's some part of myself, or it belongs to me. We start looking at the mind, and we're like, well, these thoughts are definitely me. These emotions, that definitely defines who I am. Start going a bit deeper. You're like, well, I think I am this gender. I think I am this age. I think I am this race. I think I am this nationality. I think I have these personality traits. So we start coming up with a list of who we identify as, what we identify as. Then ask yourself, is anything on that list permanent? Is anything on that list unchanging? Is anything on that list necessarily the way things always have been and always will be? Anything whatsoever on that list? And if you're being honest, you'll have to admit the answer is no. No, I haven't always been young, and I won't always be young. No, I haven't always been fill in the blank. What is it you think you are? Well, if you think you're male, well, in past lives you were female at some point. You think you're male, well, in future lives you might not be male. You might be something else. You might be female or otherwise. Um, and as you look even more closely, it's like, well, actually, what am I right now? Am I actually male, or am I just having an experience which I label as male? What does it mean to label something as male in the first place? Is there any ultimate essence to that? It's very interesting if you look at different human cultures throughout history, and even in modern times, comparing different cultures. What defines masculinity and femininity can vary dramatically, even to the point of complete reversal. A great example of this is courtly fashion in the UK a couple hundred years ago. The men looked like women by modern standards. They wore big goofy wigs. They had tons of makeup on, tons of perfume. They wore dresses. Basically, they looked like drag queens by modern standards. They would all fit in perfectly in a drag parade. But the point is, they were basically wearing all of the external signs that we would call feminine. But at that time, that was considered the height of masculinity. That was considered part of being a man, part of manliness. Part of manliness was your long-haired wig and your makeup and your perfume and your dress. So if you identify as male or as female, also ask yourself, what on earth does that mean? Does that actually have any truth to it? Does it have any eternal, timeless truth to it? And then looking at your own identity, like right in this moment, where is the male or where is the female? And actually, what you wind up finding, if you're actually looking, well, you find out the only thing you can really clearly identify as male or female is particular parts of a body. So somewhere in this zone, there's some chunks of flesh which you could, I guess, reasonably call male if you want to do that. But is that me? Am I those chunks of flesh? Is that who I am? Does that define me? Are they subject to change? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Those could change. They could change, and yet this experience of a being would seem to continue. So clearly those particular chunks of flesh are not me. They don't define me. They don't control me. They aren't my eternal, infinite essence. And inside the mind, can you find male or female anywhere inside the mind? Again, if you're being honest, the answer is no, because any mental or emotional characteristic is ultimately labeled male or female by cultural conditioning. It has nothing to do with any actual physical component. Again, the only thing that defines gender is a physical component. So nothing to do whatsoever with the mind. So looking at the mind, what is this identity of being male or female? And eventually you'll trace it down to certain patterns of thought, patterns of thinking about oneself as male or thinking about oneself as female. And those are subject to change, like everything else. So clearly that's not who we are. If it was who we are, then it would always be exactly the same. It would never vary or alter even slightly. So looking at all of our preferences and opinions, things that we think, oh, these clearly define me. Well, look more closely. Have you always been that way? Every single moment of your entire life, as far back as you can remember, have you always been that way? Of course, the answer is definitely not. Or even if something seems to be pretty much the same for as long as you can remember, ask yourself, is it at all conceivable that it could change in the future? It could be otherwise. Again, the answer is yeah, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. So the more we look at what we think we are, what we think is myself, the more we really ask, could that actually possibly be my immutable, unchanging characteristic, something that never, ever, ever could possibly be otherwise? And the answer is no, of course not. It's all subject to change. And thinking about this body, often it's easiest to start with the body. Bodies are quite coarse and obvious. So this body, what is this body made up of? Well, it's made up of the food that we eat. It's made up of the water that we drink. It's made up of the air that we breathe. It's made up of the heat that we absorb or that we generate from the food that we eat. Well, where does all that come from? Well, it comes from the outside world. Where does it go? To the outside world. So what is inside and what is outside? What is me and what is not me? This is a fascinating experience when you're eating, by the way. So you have a spoonful of food and you're like, okay, that spoonful of food is not me. Now, as you're eating that food, ask yourself, at what point does it become me? So you put it in your mouth. Is it now me? The moment the food is inside the mouth, is it me? No? Yes? If you think yes, then spit it out again and have a look. Ask yourself, is that me? So chew, chew, chew. Is it me yet? If you think yes, again, spit it out. Have a look. Chew, chew, chew. Swallow. Is it me yet? There's actually a way you can check. It's not particularly pleasant, but you could vomit that back up and ask yourself, is that me? That chunk of partially digested food on the plate, is that me? No, don't think so. Probably not. Well, then what continues happening? It continues breaking down. Continues breaking down in the stomach, dispersing throughout the body. Eventually, it gets shed from the body in the form of feces, urine, in the form of dead skin cells, dead hair, fingernails, toenails, saliva, tears, mucus, all the ways that we shed things from the body. And then it's very clearly not me again. But where did this magical shift occur when we stopped seeing it as not me and started seeing it as me? When did the food stop being not self and start to become self? And when did it become not self again? So contemplating this process, one can start to realize that actually it's always not self. It's always just a causal process of the natural world, shifting its shape, shifting its place, shifting it from one attribute to another. But it's just an unfolding of natural things going from place to place, shifting position. So the proper question is not, when does it switch from being not self to being self? When does it switch from self back to not self? The proper question is, when do we apply the distorted misperception of self to that lump of food? So, and with the mind, it's even, it's more subtle, but you can actually apply the same process. Like during the meditation, I was watching some thoughts appearing in the mind, and I was reflecting, well, where did these thoughts come from? I didn't create them in that moment. So where did they come from? Well, just like you put food into your stomach and that produces a physical response, in the same way, at some point in the past, some sensory information was put into this mind, and that produces a mental response. The exact characteristics of that response depend upon the current conditions of the mind. But the current conditions of the mind were also determined by events of the past. So in the moment of non-interventionist observation, of watching without observing, we're not generating any volition. We're not creating anything in body or mind. We're simply watching the unfolding of past causes. We're watching the unfolding of past conditioning. We're not creating any new causes or conditions. Technically, we are. We're creating the causes and conditions of mindfulness and wisdom. But we're not creating the causes and conditions of, say, thoughts and emotions or physical sensations or anything like that. All of that is just the unfolding of past causes and conditions. So watching these thoughts appear in my mind, and it's like, well, how interesting. The thoughts that appear in my mind are probably not the thoughts that are appearing in Jens's mind. So our resident who's sitting here, he's probably having some thoughts appear in his mind, unless his samadhi was great. Was your samadhi great? Completely thoughtless for 30 minutes? He's shaking his head. So he also had some thoughts appearing in his mind, almost certainly different from mine. Why? Because of different past causes and conditions. So if you, for example, a very common example, if you spend all day listening to Britney Spears songs, what do you think is going to appear in your mind when you're meditating? I'll give you a hint. It starts with Britney and ends with Spears. Was that too obvious of a hint?
No.
Pretty obvious?
Yeah.
Okay. If you didn't see that one coming, then I don't know what to say to you anyway. So why? Hopefully you're not actually sitting there silently singing Britney Spears to yourself when you meditate. I hope not, anyway. So why do these Britney Spears songs keep appearing in your mind? Because your mind is simply producing the effects of its past causes and conditions. That's all it's doing. It's not you, it's not personal, it's just an echo. If you go to a canyon and you yell out, "Hello!" and you wait a couple seconds, sometimes you don't even have to wait very long, then you'll start to hear echoes coming back to you. These echoes, hello, 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 hello. What's going on there? You're not saying anything, and yet these echoes keep happening. Because you created the causes and conditions for those echoes to happen. That's why. So it's the same. All those mental and emotional patterns and processes and activities happening in the mind. When we're not actively generating them, then what's appearing is simply the echoes of past causes and conditions. It's just the consequences of what's been done in the past. Or it's the reverberations of some experience from the past. And that's all completely impersonal. So why do we take it personally? Why do we take any of this personally? Why do we take our body sensations personally? So I was having a bit of stomach pain during the meditation. So stomach pain is a part of my life. It's related to a chronic health problem I have. So spikes of stomach pain are something I experience very, very often, often many times a day. So if I take it personally, it's really bloody painful. It feels like somebody is stabbing me in the stomach. Ow. But if I don't take it personally, then it's just a sensation coming and going. But all too often, of course, I take it personally. I'm like, oh, my stomach hurts. I have this stabbing pain in my stomach. It feels like someone is stabbing me. Then there's a problem. And the problem is that I'm taking it personally. It's not personal. It's just causality. It's just conditionality. That's all. In the past, there were causes and conditions put in motion, which are now producing an effect. There's nothing I can do about it in the present moment except observe. It's the same with the mind. Once again, it's the same with the mind. Whatever's happening in the mind, it's just the consequences of past causes and conditions. Don't take it personally. It's not personal. When the wind blows, the leaves fall from the tree. It's not personal. It's the same with the mind. It's exactly the same as the wind knocking leaves off a tree. Why do we take it personally? When the wind blows and the leaves fall, do we go out and yell like, "Why are you doing this to me?" No, we're just like, oh, that's what happens when the wind blows. Naturally. What else would you expect? That's nature. That's how nature works. So you can look at the unfolding of this body-mind experience in exactly the same way. It's not personal. It's just how nature works. The natural unfolding of nature is that a cause always produces a corresponding effect. That's how nature works. It's not personal. If you throw a ball up in the air, what's going to happen? It's going to fall back down. It's not personal. If you throw the ball up in the air and you're standing in the same place, it's going to bonk you on the head. That doesn't mean somebody is attacking me. It just means that a cause led to a corresponding effect. It's not personal. So we can apply this perception in our meditation practice. So that was the instructions I was trying to give during the meditation period was some way to directly apprehend not self. So normally I teach the perception of not self in a much more roundabout way. Most commonly I teach it through the perception of impermanence. Because through the perception of impermanence, we're seeing first developing mindfulness and samadhi, because mindfulness and samadhi, one, they're pleasant, but two, it also helps to sharpen and stabilize the mind. So we can see impermanence more clearly. then developing the recognition of impermanence, clearly seeing that everything in body, mind are constantly changing. And at some point, it dawns on you, if everything in body, mind are constantly changing, that means I can't be any of it. Because whatever was present a moment ago is gone. So that clearly wasn't me. And whatever's present right now is going to be gone in a moment. So that clearly can't be me either. So through the perception of impermanence, the perception of not self just kind of creeps up on you, sneaks up on you until it's like, bam, nothing here, no one here. So that's one way I like to teach Anattā-saññā. Another way is through the contemplation of the 6 elements. Because this is one way of subdividing our experience piece by piece and trying to pull out each element of our experience and seeing it as just a function of nature. Like seeing the earth element as being just a function of nature, not me, not mine, just dirt, that's all. And water element, it's just water. It's not me, it's not mine. When you drink a glass of water, is that me? When you go to the toilet and urinate, is that me? It's just water, that's all. Put water in one end and it comes out the other. It's not personal. It never was. Another way I teach the perception of not self is through the practice of silent illumination. What we call in the Pali tradition, Animitta Samadhi. Practice of relinquishing all objects. Because as you relinquish all objects, eventually you start to realize that what you're relinquishing is pieces of your self-identity. And you watch those pieces of your self-identity cease to be, disappear from experience. And you realize that can't possibly be me. This is another way of approaching it that's even more direct. And finally, the way I was teaching during the meditation practice is an extremely direct way of apprehending not self, an extremely direct way of experiencing not self. But that also makes it extraordinarily challenging. Generally speaking, the more direct a practice is, the more difficult it is. And the more strongly it relies upon having thoroughly cultivated all the factors of the path in one's life. And that includes the factor of right view. So if you haven't well-developed right view, then Anattā-saññā is going to be completely out of reach. There's no hope. So ultimately, we do need to come back to right view. So right view, an understanding of karma, cause and effect, an understanding that everything we experience is the effects of past choices. An understanding of rebirth, recognizing that there's no first cause. There's always a cause before that. So there's no beginning to be found. This is a very important point. There's no beginning to be found. And right view, recognizing the function of will, volition, but recognizing that volition also is conditional. It also is subject to cause and effect like everything else. And of course, critical elements of right view are anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Recognizing that all things are impermanent, all things are unsatisfying, a source of suffering, and all things are ultimately impersonal. So it's only through that basis of right view that one is going to cultivate the perception of not self. Because another element of right view is the recognition that self-identity is the source of all suffering. Doesn't matter what your self-identity is, it is suffering. And the more strongly you hold on to a self-identity, the more suffering it is. Doesn't matter what your self-identity is, it is suffering. It is dukkha. One of the big things that's going on in modern culture is this idea of identities. Of everyone saying that they have a right to have their own unique identity and the right to identify as whatever they want to identify as. Well, in Buddhist terms, that's basically saying I have a right to have as much dukkha as I want, and I have a right to my particular flavor of dukkha, And I have a right to accumulate even more dukkha and cling as tightly as I want to my dukkha. It's like, well, okay, have fun with that. You won't have fun with it, by the way, because it's dukkha. Like all those identities you're clinging to, it's just dukkha. The more identities you have, the more dukkha you have. The more strongly you hold to your identities, the more strongly you hold to your dukkha. And this has nothing to do with civil rights. It has everything to do with torturing yourself. So if you want to torture yourself, go right ahead. But if you want to be happy, it's time to relinquish your identities because they're not bringing you happiness. All they're doing is making you a giant target for dukkha. It's kind of like if you have a river and there's all kinds of trash floating in that river. Well, if you go and stand in that river and you make yourself very big, then what's going to happen? Well, that trash is just going to keep hitting your body. And the bigger you make yourself, the more trash you get hit by. But the smaller you make yourself, the less trash hits you. And if you can make yourself disappear completely, then no trash will land at all. It will just be carried away by the river. There's no problem. So this is exactly what happens with self-identities. The bigger and stronger our self-identities are, the more dukkha we get hit by. The smaller and slighter we make our self-identity, the less dukkha we get hit by. And if you can make your self-identity disappear entirely, then there'll be no place for dukkha to land. And the mind will finally be completely free. So this is the path of Buddhism. So I think I've said enough at this time. We can end with 3 sadhus, and then I'll take any questions you might have. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So hello to everyone who's joining in. Hello to Rick, Maria, Mary, John, Patricia, Rupali, Barua, Elaine, Tora, Adis, Gita, Kim, Sud. Thanks to all of you for joining in. And I see a couple questions. So here Kim is asking, what about the hormonal components of gender and how this affects the mind? What about it? First off, hormones are physical things. So as I mentioned, that relates to a certain element of the body, certain aspects of the body. As for how it affects the mind, well, actually, this is an interesting thing. So I think sometimes about what we culturally identify as being male behavior traits or female behavior traits, male emotions, female emotions. And I think about the people I've known in my life and how well these actually describe them. And I realize it's actually not a particularly good descriptor. I've met lots of men who seem to display very female, whatever the hell that means, very female emotions and female thought patterns and female behaviors. And I've met lots of supposedly female people who displayed male traits, male behaviors, male emotion patterns. So how much their hormones were affecting their mind, I don't know, but just looking from the outside, didn't seem to be making much of a difference. Didn't seem to be stopping the so-called women from acting like so-called men and the so-called men from acting like so-called women. So how much do hormones affect the mind? I don't know. I'm not an expert in these things. But clearly not enough to completely determine somebody's thoughts and emotions and behaviors. And even to the extent that it does, once again, you're just watching the unfolding of cause and effect. That's not you. Yeah, if you have very high testosterone levels, that might make you feel very energetic and maybe even aggressive. Well, it's just a feeling in the body. That's not you. It's actually very interesting to see what that feels like. Does that define your ultimate true essence? Is that who you are for all eternity? I don't think so. Uh, for one thing, people have fluctuating hormone levels. Their hormone levels can go up or down, or the patterns and balances can shift over time. And that can, in fact, produce significant behavior changes in people. But one thing interesting I've noticed about Buddhist practitioners is that as they go through hormonal changes, their mind remains relatively unaffected. And the more well-developed someone's practice is, the less they are affected by hormone changes in the body. Yeah, and also be careful of this trap of always assuming that the mind is the product of the body. Assuming that the mind is the product of the body is very much a scientific materialist belief that currently lacks proof, lacks evidence. It's just a blind belief. So do look at that. If you're holding to this belief that the mind is a emergent phenomenon produced by the body, recognize that that's not a proven fact. It's a belief. The one consensus in the scientific world is that they have absolutely no idea what the mind is. It's the one thing they seem to agree on when it comes to the mind. Rick says, how do we skillfully practice not self when we interact with others in daily life? Don't take anything personally. And Sud asks, is it possible to develop samadhi with 32 parts of the body meditation? That doesn't really have anything to do with the topic at hand, so I think that's better asked during monk chat. I'll give you a very brief answer, which is yes, but. So, for more detail, ask during monk chat. And that's the last of the questions from online. Anything from the residents? No? So if there's no other questions from online, then we can go ahead and end the session. So I don't see anything else coming up. So if you do have lingering questions, please feel free to bring them to monk chat and we'll have some more discussion at that time. So for now, we'll end the session with 3 sadhus. Oh, wait, one more question. Alex says, is biological sex an extraneous trait only in humans or in other realms as well? Well, it definitely exists in the human realm. Definitely exists in the animal realm, though in the animal realm it can be much more complex than in the human realm, and also much simpler in some ways. So there's a lot of variety in the animal realm, and that includes when it comes to the matter of biological sex. There's also a number of animals which are capable of self-sex change. So they can choose to change their own sex, which I find very interesting. And in the other realms, so the lower Deva realms do still have gender. Whether they have biological sex in the sense that humans do, well, they don't really have biology in the sense that humans do. So I'm not so sure about biological sex when it comes to Devas, but they do still seem to have a sense of gender and gender identity, which I suspect affects how they experience their body mind. But their body mind is not like our meaty, bloody things that we have. And honestly, I've never really cared to think too much about the nature of Deva bodies. But they do definitely have gender identity. So the concept of male and female does exist in the Deva realms, and they do have some kind of body, though it's much more subtle than our bloody things that we have, our meaty things that we have. In the lower realms, I'm not sure. It's not really spoken about that I can think of. And in the very high realms, so the Brahmas and above, then there's no masculinity or femininity at all. There's no male, female at all. In the very highest heaven realms, there's no concept of sex or gender at all. It's just not relevant whatsoever. Sud says, can one transcend one's trap of biological sex through 32 parts of the body meditation? Then how does one go about doing it? I'll be honest, I don't normally use that meditation. 32 parts, I don't use it. So I'm really not the best person to ask about it. It's not something I've done much or practiced much. I don't really see biological sex as a trap. Just recognize it as just being, it's just part of the body, and the body is just a function of nature. So I actually approach that more through, first off, reflecting on causality, and second, actually through the, just the perception of not self. What is this body? This body is not me. So that also means the biological aspects of sex are not me. Like if the gender-specific parts of this body were removed or altered, does that mean I would cease to exist? No. It just means that the experience of the body would be different. That's all. So clearly, I cannot be defined by biological sex. So there's actually one way of practicing with not self, is go through each thing that you think is me and contemplate if this was removed or changed, would that destroy me? Or would there still be a sense of me, just with a different condition of body, different condition of mind? And you'll find the answer is always yes. And in this way, you can see that any particular characteristic of body or mind ultimately is not who we really are. So that's the last of the questions. So thank you for your interesting questions. And again, we'll go ahead and end with 3 sadhus at this time. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you have any questions, please bring them to Monk Chat on Friday. So we'll see you next time.